The bald head, the shades, the chain vest. More often than not, these are the things that people would think about if you said the name Isaac Hayes to them. But Isaac Hayes was an iceberg. Those things that we just named were what you would see on the surface, but there was much more to the man than just a bald head and some chains. Before he became a star on stage, Hayes had already been one behind the scenes for years. He and his songwriting partner David Porter were the premier songwriting team at Stax Records. They were responsible for the worldwide smash hits Hold On, I'm Coming and Soul Man. They also wrote hit songs for Johnny Taylor and Carla Thomas. In the late 1960s, in the aftermath of the passing of Otis Redding, Hayes became Stax Records' saving grace, as well as his biggest star. Later, Isaac became the first black person to win an Oscar for scoring a movie. Broadening his horizons, Hayes would also become an actor, starring in movies while appearing on various TV shows as well. Finally, Hayes became known to a whole new legion of fans through his voiceover work. He starred as Chef on the animated series South Park for nearly a decade. Having said all of that, there are still the details of exactly how and why Hayes was such an influential figure. Our story intends to fill in those details for you. Isaac Lee Hayes Jr. was born on August 20th, 1942 in Covington, Tennessee to Isaac Sr. and Eula. His parents had gotten married 8 years earlier when they were both only 15 years old. Eula had severe mental issues, so much so that she had to be institutionalized. While there, she suffered both a physical and a mental breakdown. Sadly, on January 17, 1944, she passed away for unknown reasons. Isaac was only 16 months old at the time. Isaac Sr., with no desire to raise his own children, instead gave them to Isaac's maternal grandparents, Willie Wade Sr. and Rashida. Isaac's grandfather worked picking cotton until Isaac was about 5. Thinking things would be better someplace else, he decided to move the family to Memphis, Tennessee. Unfortunately, things was bad there too. Sometimes Willie, still having to pick cotton, would take Isaac to work with him in the fields. Aside of that, Isaac began going to school and started going to church. While he was there, he got a chance to sing, learn how to play the piano. Isaac eventually also taught himself how to play the saxophone and the flute. Meanwhile, Willie didn't make enough money to support a family of 4. As a result, Isaac and his sister were sent to live with other families. Isaac was sent to stay with a friend of the Wades. However, when Isaac was 11, his grandfather passed away, and at that point, Isaac's grandmother wanted family around her and brought both of the children back to stay with her. Unfortunately, she didn't have a lot of money. She was on welfare, and they lived in a 1-bedroom apartment. They couldn't afford the utility bill, so once the sun went down every day, their lights were gone until sunrise. They had to beg neighbors for water, and Isaac had to chop down an outhouse just for them to have firewood in the wintertime. During one especially severe winter, his sister Willette nearly died from a combination of the flu and hunger. Isaac at one point wanted to be a doctor, but he realized that his real future lied in being a musician. He knew he couldn't get where he wanted to go if he had to be in school all the time. So as a result, after he repeated the 8th grade, he dropped out of school. He hid this fact from his grandmother because he knew she was just wanting him to go back to school. Hayes then proceeded to take on a number of odd jobs. Picking cotton, he was a shoe shine boy, a short order cook, and an usher at the theater. After he turned 18, Isaac ran into an unexpected situation. At that point, noticing how many days he had missed at school, a guidance counselor came by his house. His grandmother, who still at this point didn't know that he had dropped out, was shocked to hear exactly how many days Isaac had missed. When she confronted him about it, Isaac was straight up, and he told her, look, I quit school because I was humiliated. I was tired of looking like a scarecrow at school. I was skinny, and I was wearing raggedy clothes. Isaac was promised, though, that he would get some better clothes to wear, but only if he went back to school. They also told him that if he graduated high school, his musical talent probably would be good enough to get him a college scholarship somewhere. While he didn't necessarily want to go back to school, he did like the idea of being able to get a scholarship. And so that, along with the promise of better clothes, encouraged him to go. After he graduated high school in 1962, Isaac did indeed get scholarship offers from several different historically black colleges and universities, including Jackson State and Tennessee State. However, those plans were derailed because Isaac had gotten a girl, Nancy, pregnant. Shortly afterwards, they got married. To make ends meet, Isaac began working as a meat packer and at a slaughterhouse. Meanwhile, he was still trying to make things happen with his music. Hayes, along with a friend, auditioned for a man named Chips Moman at Youngstown Records. They got signed and recorded 3 songs for the label: Laura, We On Our Last Go-Round, Sweet Temptation, and CC Rider. However, neither one of those songs did much, and that was the end of his time, for now, at Youngstown. Still persevering, Isaac got an invitation to play the piano for a New Year's Eve party at the end of 1963. It was great, but there was only one problem with that. Isaac didn't know how to play the piano, but he said he did because he needed the money. In order to make the best of a potentially bad situation, he went to the venue early, trying to get in some practice so he could at least fake it for a while before they found out that he couldn't play and fired him. The funny thing about it was, when the other musicians got there, Isaac found out that they couldn't play either. On top of that, these dudes had the nerve to show up drunk. Then a great thing happened. All the guests at the party were smashed too. So much so that to them the music sounded great. In fact, the club owner thought that they were so good, he hired Hayes and his group for more gigs. Shortly after that, Isaac joined a man named Floyd Newman's band. Newman took a liking to Isaac and began encouraging him to write songs. After some time, Newman got a chance to record 2 songs at Stax Records. However, he didn't have any original material. He wound up asking Isaac for help, and Hayes in turn reached out to the band's drummer, Howard Grimes, for guidance. They combined to create the instrumental song Frog Stomp, which was released as a single, back with another instrumental, Sassy. In an early lesson in the music business for Hayes, Newman got writing credits for both of the songs. However, he froze out both Hayes and Grimes. Their names are nowhere to be found. Isaac was able to parlay this session, though, into a shaky position in Stax Records' house band. This was due to the absence of Booker T. Jones of Booker T. and the MGs because he was attending school out of state. This also happened because Isaac, again, lied about his ability to do something that he couldn't do. He told the people that he could play these various instruments, and he was able to fake it until he made it. By this time, Otis Redding was Stax's biggest star. Also around this time, in May of 1965, Stax co-owner Jim Stewart made a deal with Atlantic Records, primarily Vice President Jerry Wexler. At the time, the deal seemed beneficial to both parties. However, an unknown or not understood clause in the contracts would later bring Stax Records to its knees. Regardless of anything else that was going on, Isaac still wasn't getting enough steady work. Taking his career in a different direction, Isaac would soon connect with David Porter. To some people, Porter was Stax's answer to Motown's Smokey Robinson, as he was a young guy who wore a lot of different hats. He was singing, he was writing, he was producing, and he was also a talent scout. Initially, Hayes and Porter did some songs for Porter himself that turned out pretty well locally. A look at the credits for the songs reveals something unexpected, though. The writers of the songs were listed as David Porter and Ed Lee. Ed Lee was an assumed name that Isaac was forced to use to avoid a songwriting agreement that he already had with some other label. While the songs weren't big sellers, they established Hayes and Porter as songwriters at the label. At Atlantic Records in New York, they were well aware of the quality of music that Stax was putting out. Atlantic thought that their own artists had lost their edge. In an attempt to get some of what Stax had into Atlantic's recordings, they decided to send some of their acts down south to record in Memphis. The first act that they decided to send south was Wilson Pickett. Pickett, nicknamed Wicked Wilson, was a handful to deal with. And that was before he even got in the studio. He was brusque, he was rough, he'd be cursing and stuff, and he generally wasn't a nice guy. Furthermore, he was offended by the fact that he had to work with what he felt were country bumpkins in Memphis. However, he felt differently after he saw the results of his sessions. The first song that he cut at Stax was the iconic In the Midnight Hour, which went #1 R&B. Atlantic, seeing these immediate and fantastic results, decided to send another act for the same treatment. This time, the duo Sam and Dave were picked to head south. They weren't feeling it either, just like Wilson Pickett wasn't. They felt like it was a punishment being forced to go down there and work with these dudes. Meanwhile, Hayes and Porter were in the studio with the difficult Pickett, working on the songs It's All Over and Danger Zone. It's All Over featured Patti LaBelle and the Bluebells on the chorus and was released as a single. Song went to #4 R&B. At this point, less than a year into their collaboration with Atlantic, Stax owner Jim Stewart had grown tired of the complaints he was getting about Wilson Pickett's behavior. Stewart believed that Pickett was abusing both alcohol and drugs. As a result, he barred Pickett from working in the studio. Getting back to Sam and Dave, Hayes and Porter went to the studio with the duo and worked on the song You Don't Know Like I Know, which was released as a single, and the song hit #7 R&B. Outside of the studio, there were a couple of other things going on with Isaac. First, his newfound fame had him feeling himself, and he began messing around on his wife with as many women as he could handle. Reflecting on this time, Porter states that Hayes had at least 6 side chicks, with 2 of them actually being roommates. In the middle of getting a divorce from Dancy, Isaac was already seeing a woman named Emma. After his divorce was final, he and Emma got married in 1965. Next, Isaac began having issues with receiving proper payment from Stax for his work. Porter was getting paid $50 a week, which he in turn gave half of to Hayes. The fact that Stax owner Jim Stewart was such a cheapskate was the reason that even after having had success as songwriters, not only was David Porter still selling insurance on the side, Isaac Hayes was still working at the meatpacking plant when his money got slow. While Hayes was mulling over how to handle this situation, Stewart was bringing in a new hire, Al Bell, to serve as head of national promotions. Bell was a former local DJ who described himself on the air as, quote unquote, your 6'4" bundle of joy, 212 pounds of Mrs. Bell's baby boy, unquote. Getting back to Hayes' issue with his pay, he, as well as other black musicians, took note of how well Stewart was treating Steve Cropper. Cropper was a musician and songwriter too, but he also was white, and he was quote-unquote Jim's boy. Stewart was paying Cropper $125 a week, more than any of the other musicians were receiving. Cropper also received a share of the publishing on any song he wrote. At the time, trying to counteract what he knew felt like a division of the whites versus the blacks, was one of the reasons that Stewart had hired Al Bell. He wanted Stax to be, quote-unquote, blacker. One immediate effect of hiring Bell was that it diminished co-owner Estelle's role in the organization. Estelle was Jim's sister, and she was the one that had given them the money initially in order to be able to open the Stax records. By this time, Hayes and Porter had decided what they needed to do about this little bit of money they was making. They went to the competition to see what they had to offer. The two of them met with Chips Moman at Youngstown Records. Remember, we had mentioned Moman earlier, where Hayes had recorded 3 sides that just didn't do anything. So they had a previous relationship. Moman himself had previously worked for Stax, and he was interested in taking them down. Hayes and Porter proposed to Moman that they start a sub-label called GD Records. Both sides agreed, and the duo went to work with Moment right off, leaving Stax in the rearview mirror. In a few days, they had already cut 2 sides. Man, these dudes didn't waste no time. They had already cut 2 sides with Homer Banks, Lady of Stone, and Sweetie Pie. Meanwhile, Jim Stewart was shocked. He had no idea that Hayes and Porter would ever do anything like this. How they gonna mess up his business by trying to get more money someplace else? They were key to what was happening at Stax, and the label would be in big trouble without them. Now, Stewart began to see the true impact of the differences he made between the white Steve Cropper and his black employees. To get Hayes and Porter to come back, on his sister's advice, Stewart offered the men the same deal that he had with Cropper. He also included them, along with the 4 members of Booker T and the MGs, in what was called the Big Six. Each of the men would get a share of 1/6 of any royalties from Stax hits. The men accepted, and just like that, they were back at Stax, because we all know that money talks. After their return, Hayes began to make some personal changes. First, wanting to bulk up on his skinny physique, dude started lifting weights. This is also when he started shaving his head bald, and of course nobody was doing that at the time. And he started wearing those wraparound shades. Hayes and Porter proceeded to record Mabel John on the cut Your Good Thing Is About to End, which went number 6 R&B. Next it was Ruby Johnson's I'll Run Your Hurt Away, which hit number 31 pop. William Bell's Never Like This Before, co-written with Booker T, went top 30 R&B. On their next project, they were working on a song for Sam and Dave. In the middle of one session, Porter had to use the bathroom. After what seemed a really long time, Hayes was tired of waiting and called out several times to Porter to hurry up so they could finish writing. Hold on, man, I'm coming, Porter responded. That triggered something in Isaac's head, and he knew right away that that would be the title of the song they were working on. About 15 minutes after Porter finally came back, the title also had a hook and a track. This is how the hit song Hold On I'm Coming came to be. The song was an immediate hit, and even Atlantic Records was happy, because this is what they was looking for. The song went number 1 R&B and number 21 pop. However, even with the song's success, there was still a problem. Some people felt that the title of the song could be misinterpreted. They thought that the coming referred to in the title could be referring to the sexual use of the word. Some people are just nasty. But anyway, this caused Stewart to change the title on singles to Hold On, I'm A-Comin', which just sounds so much better. No, it doesn't. That sounds stupid. However, albums still had the original title. Eventually, the name on singles was changed back to the original, and nobody else was talking about that. It just kind of went away. The song's success meant that there was now a rush put out to get Sam and Dave's next album done. When the album, Double Dynamite, was released in December of 1966, it went number 7 R&B. 1967 would bring a major change at Stax that no one could have ever predicted or possibly saw coming. We're going to take a time out from our story to ask you to like, subscribe, share, comment, hit that notification bell, and repeat when it comes to our videos. Now, back to our story. Hayes was looking to record his own album as an artist, but Stewart wouldn't let him do it. Why? Stewart felt that Isaac's voice was, quote-unquote, too romantic for the kind of music that they did at Stax. That was that gut-busting soul, and he just felt like Isaac couldn't do it. Hayes even pleaded his case to Al Bell, who listened but didn't act on the request at the time. While Isaac was waiting to hear back, he was inspired to write another song. Watching news about the Detroit riots in July of 1967 on television, he later found out that in Detroit, if you wrote the word soul on the door of your business, your store wouldn't get burned down. The word soul got stuck in his head. He decided to write a song about being a soul man. The song would become an across-the-board smash, going number 1 R&B and number 2 pop. Despite all of his success, Isaac didn't have much. He's still living in the apartment with his wife, and he owed his ex-wife child support. He didn't even own a car. Instead, Porter would have to come and pick him up every day. Meanwhile, tragedy struck not only Stax Records, but the music world as a whole. On December the 10th, 1967, Otis Redding, only 26 years old, perished when his plane crashed into a frozen lake. With his passing, Stax had lost his biggest star. Not long after this, out of nowhere, Isaac would get a chance he'd literally been begging for, to record his own album. How it happened, though, was very unusual and makes absolutely no sense. Isaac was attending a birthday party. He was enjoying himself like people do at a party, and he had had a few drinks. In the middle of the party, Al Bell came up to him and told him that he wanted him to do an album. Isaac agreed. He was like, yeah, all right then. Then he went on back to drinking. What Isaac didn't know is that Bell wanted him to record the album that same day. Isaac had no time to prepare for this, nor did he have any original material. What was the rush? I just don't understand this. But anyway, rushed into the studio by Bell, but not wanting to miss the shot that he'd been waiting for. An inebriated Hayes had no idea what to record. Ultimately, he launched into covers of songs from the likes of B.B. King and Count Basie. When he was done, Hayes had improvised the whole album. The result, titled Presenting Isaac Hayes, was released in March of 1968. The album was not a big seller, and Hayes returned to his songwriting duties after the recording was completed. Another tragedy struck the world on April the 4th, 1968, when Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated at the Lorraine Hotel, which was just down the street from Stax Records. Immediately afterwards, police and National Guard handled the anger and unrest from blacks with an extremely heavy hand. Hayes himself would almost immediately feel that same heavy hand. The day after Dr. King's passing, Isaac was working at Stax when Doug Dunn, a white man, came to the studio. When both men later left the studio at the same time, a police car sped over and approached them. When it got there, several cops jumped out and immediately trained their weapons on Hayes. They assumed that Isaac was trying to rob the white man. Only Dunn's explanation to the contrary saved Isaac from having the incident escalate any higher than it already had. After this, overcome by bitterness and anguish, Hayes couldn't write for nearly a year. In May of 1968, life as everyone at Stax Records knew it was about to change. Atlantic Records, now that Otis Redding was gone, saw no real reason to continue their relationship with Stax Records. As a result, Atlantic offered Stax $2 million to buy them out. Instead, Stewart decided to sever his ties with Atlantic. When he told the Atlantic Records attorneys of his intent to do just that, they told him he had the right to do so. However, he wouldn't be taking anything with him because all of Stax's music now belonged to Atlantic. This was due to the contract language we referenced earlier, which meant that Stax no longer had any music to release. There was no catalog, there was no old music, there was no new music. Anything that had Stax's name on it really belonged to Atlantic now. When Stewart confronted Wexler about this, Wexler played dumb, claimed that the attorneys, they must have slipped that language in later, man, without my knowledge. I didn't know. Yeah. Regardless, Jim and his sister Estelle signed the paperwork severing their relationship with Atlantic on May 6, 1968. To replenish Stax's now empty catalog, while also attempting to keep the label in business, Bell decided to have all the Stax artists make 27 new albums and release 30 singles. The albums would be released in a short amount of time in what Bell called a soul explosion. This is why Hayes was allowed to record a second album, this time under his own terms. The result, Hot Buttered Soul, was released in June of 1969. It went number 1 R&B and number 9 pop. The album featured Isaac's raps, or spoken introductions to some of his songs. This would be revisited numerous times on his future albums. From the album, the single Walk On By went number 13 R&B. The success of the album meant Hayes had to now go out on tour, but he still had time to head back to Stax between tour stops to work on his next album. As a result, Isaac's third album, The Isaac Hayes Movement, was released in April of 1970. This album also went number 1 R&B and also hit number 1 on the jazz charts and number 8 pop. Around this time, Hayes acquired the nickname Black Moses. The name spoke to the power and influence Isaac's music had on his black fans. Initially, Hayes wanted no part of the nickname because he thought it was sacrilegious. Eventually, though, he came to see the name as a symbol of black pride. As a thank you gift for the success that Isaac had brought to the label, Stax purchased a $26,000 gold Cadillac Eldorado for Hayes. Isaac tricked that car out with some black velvet fur, man, and leather interior, and he put a phone in there. He had the closed circuit security included in. He had a color TV off in there. He had a Frigidaire in there, and he had some flashing go-go lights. On top of that, he had a chauffeur to take him all over town. Far removed from the days when he had to hitch a ride to work with David Porter, Hayes now owned a Mercedes, 2 Jaguars, 3 stretching limousines, and 6 motorcycles. Those cars were parked outside an 8,000 square foot, 14-room, 3-story mansion that sat on 10 acres of land in Memphis. His closet was filled with high-end leather and suede jumpsuits, man. What about them chain-link gold vests I'm talking about? While he also was rocking diamond-encrusted socks. Yeah. He also had a gym built in the basement. He had to get in shape. This allowed him to put on 30 pounds of muscle. Hayes said his goal was to be muscular like Charles Atlas. Getting back to his music, Hayes would release his second album in the same calendar year, titled To Be Continued, in November. Isaac had another number 1 R&B hit on his hands and number 1 jazz album. The LP also went number 11 pop. Hayes' next release would allow him to do something he'd never done before, score a motion picture. At first, Isaac was involved with the Shaft project because he wanted to be cast as the lead role. This is despite the fact that he'd never even acted before. In a compromise, Hayes was promised a chance to audition for the role, but in exchange, he had to agree to score the movie. Hayes accepted that deal, and he scored the movie, but somehow that audition never took place. Something tells me they picked the right person. The Shaft double album was a huge hit, as it went number 1 on both the R&B and pop charts. Additionally, the single theme from Shaft went number 1 as well. An intriguing fact about the theme from Shaft is that originally it was just supposed to be an instrumental. However, when Hayes was told that the song would be more worthy of being considered for an Oscar if it had some lyrics, he hastily wrote down some lyrics on the envelope, and then he just kind of threw them in the song near the end of the track. Isaac took his grandmother to the Oscar ceremony in 1972. Prior to the event, he flew her out to Los Angeles from Memphis, and he gave her the full Hollywood treatment. She was made up by professional makeup artists. She got dressed up. She was pampered, the whole 9 yards. At one point, his grandmother said, quote, "Lord have mercy. I never did think I'd live to see this day," unquote. That choked Isaac up, because he knew exactly what she meant, as she'd seen Isaac through some really tough times. That was why he wanted her to be his date for the event. Hayes would go on to win the Oscar and became the first black artist to do so. Isaac's next album, Black Moses, was released in November 1971. Moses went number 1 R&B, and the single, a cover of the Jacksons' Never Can Say Goodbye, went number 5 R&B and number 22 pop. In his personal life, Hayes' marriage with Emma was over, as she had given up on trying to get Isaac to stop cheating. She filed for divorce and was awarded $6,000 a month in alimony and child support. Just as he had after his first marriage, Hayes already had another woman on retainer. While still married, he was messing around with a 22-year-old bank teller named Mignon. After his divorce was final, he gave Mignon 14 different diamond rings. Despite that, he still hadn't proposed to her until months later. She accepted, and they got married in Las Vegas. On the surface, it appeared that Isaac had changed and he was finally ready to be a one-woman man. Ha! However, in what should have been a sign that this wasn't true, there were rumors that he'd already begun fooling around with a backup dancer who was an ex-convict. Her name was Helen Washington, and she served 5 years for larceny. After her release, Hayes got her hired at Stax as a songwriter, even though she'd never written anything before. Eventually, Washington began joining Hayes on stage during his shows. There was one thing that made her stand out. Her head was just as bald as Isaac's. The duo even were on the May 1972 cover of Ebony, looking more like two lovers instead of a singer and his backup dancer. Isaac's sixth album, Joy, was released in October of 1973 and went number 2 R&B. The single, Joy Part 2, went number 7 R&B. Meanwhile, Isaac's head was being turned away from his music by something other than women, acting. To that end, Hayes was signed to make his acting debut, set to co-star with Fred Williamson in the spaghetti blaxploitation movie Three Tough Guys. Hayes also had to score the movie. Isaac next co-starred in 1974's Truck Turner with Yaphet Kotto and Nichelle Nichols. He also scored this movie and released the accompanying Truck Turner motion picture soundtrack. In other happenings, the Stax label was in trouble again. This time, Al Bell was also working on a deal with CBS, and he had a handshake agreement with their president, Clive Davis. However, Davis was unexpectedly fired for allegedly misusing $94,000 in company funds. 3 days later, Davis was indicted by a grand jury for not paying taxes on that money. Afterwards, CBS cut their inventory of the Stax albums, and as a result, Stax albums drastically fell. The IRS also started looking into Stax's accounting books, as well as Isaac's finances, with a fine-tooth comb. Meanwhile, a check for $270,000 that Isaac deposited into the bank from Stax bounced. This caused Hayes to begin looking at jumping ship and moving to another label. Along with this, a financial institution based in Memphis, Union Planters Bank, sued both Stax and CBS Records, accusing them of running a con game on the bank. Meanwhile, Hayes was in the process of buying a professional basketball team. He, along with several other investors, purchased the ABA team, the Memphis Tams. Along with this, Isaac had finally decided how to handle his issues with Al Bell. Accordingly, he filed a $5.3 million lawsuit against Bell and Stax Records, claiming that Bell had stolen over $1 million in royalties from him. The case was immediately settled out of court. Union Planters Bank sided with Hayes and forced Bell to allow Hayes to leave Stax. If Bell didn't comply, the bank told Bell that they would no longer allow him to borrow money from them. This was important because Planter was the only game in town that would allow Stax to borrow money. The bank was interested in the situation purely from a financial standpoint. Hayes had several outstanding loans with them, but he wasn't making any money due to his refusal to record for Stax Records. As a result, Hayes had a pending deal with ABC Records that would give him a $7.5 million advance upon signing. The bank was looking to cover Hayes' death with that $7.5 million. Bell had no choice but to agree. So it was in September of 1975, he allowed Hayes to leave Stax Records. Shortly after this, the label filed for bankruptcy. The bank owned all exclusive rights to Stax post-1968 masters and catalogs of music. This meant that any royalties that Isaac was due now all went straight to the bank. Additionally, his various investments were tanking, meaning that he was closer to being broke than he was to being rich. Hayes' first album at ABC, Chocolate Chip, was released in June of 1975. It went number 1 R&B and would prove to be Hayes' final album to do so. The title cut went number 13 R&B, and another single, Come Live With Me, went number 20 R&B. Hayes would record 3 more solo albums with ABC. While each of the albums hit the top 20 R&B, none of the singles charted higher than number 58 R&B, and failed to chart at all on the pop side of things. While Hayes was struggling at ABC Records, his old label, Stax, was delivered this death blow. A bankruptcy judge closed it for good on January 12, 1976. The building was immediately nailed shut, and people weren't even allowed to come and get anything out of the building. Furthermore, everything in the building was eventually put up for auction. Sadly for Hayes, his life was headed in that same direction. In the fall of 1976, Isaac was slapped with a lien for $464,000 from the IRS for unpaid federal taxes from 1974. When this became public knowledge, creditors that Hayes had been dodging all descended on him at the same time. He owed a clothing store $11,000. He also owed Saks Fifth Avenue in Beverly Hills $10,500. Now, just in case the East Coast had stuff that the West Coast didn't sell that he wanted, he also owed the Saks Fifth Avenue in Washington, D.C. $10,000. Before the end of 1976, Isaac had filed for bankruptcy, claiming that he had outstanding debts of $6.5 million. He claimed not to have enough money to pay for his housing, food, transportation, or even his utilities. However, his children were still being chauffeured to school in a limousine. The bankruptcy didn't prevent the IRS from seizing his mansion, though, and all of his contents, even that famous gold Eldorado. After moving out of his mansion, Isaac and his family moved to Atlanta, where his wife, luckily, had a home that her family owned outright. With his new label, Polydor Records, his next effort, 1978's For the Sake of Love, hit number 15 on the R&B charts, and one single from the album, Zeke the Freak, hit number 19 R&B. 1979's Don't Let Go hit number 9 R&B, while the single, Don't Let Go, hit number 11 R&B and number 18 pop. Meanwhile, also in 1979, a song he'd co-written for Dionne Warwick, Deja Vu, hit number 15 pop and number 25 R&B. This was good news for Isaac because, listen, he could definitely use the income the royalties would bring him. In the early 1980s, Hayes began to take on more acting gigs. Back in the 70s, he'd appeared in 3 episodes of the TV show The Rockford Files as Gandalf Gandy Finch. Now he appeared in the movie Escape from New York, as well as the TV shows The A-Team and Miami Vice. In his personal life, Isaac's third marriage had a result just like his previous 2 had: divorce due to his cheating. Mignon was awarded $5,000 a month in alimony, or $2,500 per child. Forced to record again in order to meet these payments, Ike signed with Columbia Records. And so it was after a 5-year hiatus from recording, Isaac would hit the charts in 1986 with the album U-Turn and the single Ike's Rap 8, which went number 9 R&B. In 1991, Hayes was in Ghana recording a video with Barry White for the song Dark and Lovely, You Over There. While there, he met a reverend who was a Scientologist. The man began talking to Ike about the technology of Scientology's principles. He went on to explain that the technology was being used by people to take control of their lives. Hayes was skeptical. At that point, he believed that Scientology brainwashed people and took their money. Others also considered the church to be a cult, as well as a money-making scheme. Despite that, after he got back to the States, Hayes researched the religion and took one of the religion's courses, The Ups and Downs of Life. Hayes later reflected that he was quote-unquote blown away by what he learned. He then took another course, Personal Values and Integrity. After this, Ike says he knew he was going to become a Scientologist. When discussing this, Hayes used the same word, technology, that was used to describe the program to him. Simply put, technology refers to the methods and specific procedures that Scientology teaches. They believe that following these teachings leads to spiritual enlightenment as well as personal improvement. Getting back to Hayes, he said that the technology held the tools that he'd been looking for to improve his life. As a result, in 1992, he went back to Ghana trying to find his roots. While he was there, he met a woman named Ajua, who was 20 years younger than him. Despite the age difference, she would eventually become Hayes' 4th wife. In Ghana, he also helped set up a Scientology Learning and Technology Center of Excellence. Finally, while he was there, he was crowned as an honorary king of Ghana. A little later, in the mid to late 1990s, a cartoon centered around 4 elementary-age kids in South Park, Colorado, was being developed by creators Trey Parker and Matt Stone. One of the characters they created was a chef who also sang soul music. The men considered Lou Rawls, Barry White, and Isaac Hayes for the role. When he was initially approached about the project, Hayes thought it was for a Disney movie. Upon meeting with South Park creators and finding out what the show was really about, Ike told the duo, quote, "I hope you have insurance because you're going to get sued," unquote. Ultimately, Hayes was chosen to voice Chef, a black man who worked in the cafeteria at an elementary school in the 99.99999% white town. The character served as a mentor to the 4 kids as they often came to him for advice. Chef sometimes used songs to get his messages across to the children, which was tailor-made for Ike. In fact, one song he sang on the show, titled Chocolate Salty Balls, P.S. I Love You, became a #1 hit in the United Kingdom. Hayes voiced the character for the first 9 seasons of the show. However, his time on South Park would end due to his connection to Scientology. Publicly, it was stated that Hayes asked to be released from his contract due to the show's satirizing of religious beliefs. While fingers pointed to the episode titled Trapped in the Closet, which satirized Scientology, Hayes' statement that he issued didn't mention Scientology. To add intrigue to the situation, Hayes had suffered a stroke in January of 2006. This occurred 2 months after the Trapped in the Closet episode aired. According to Isaac's son, Isaac III, the stroke had left his dad cognitively impaired. In other words, there was no way that he could have written or even approved the resignation letter that he supposedly issued in March of 2006. Furthermore, Isaac III revealed that Hayes' departure from the show was orchestrated by Scientology members who were exercising more and more control over his affairs. Meanwhile, Isaac worked to regain his health by exercising daily. He also had to retrain himself to play the piano. In 2007, he began touring again, including some international gigs. Unfortunately, his performances were uneven, and there were some notes he could no longer hit when he sang. Furthermore, when he gave some interviews, his answers weren't always clear or coherent. Some people questioned whether or not he was under the influence of something. On August 10th of 2008, Isaac was riding his exercise bicycle at home. When his wife came home, she found him unresponsive. Hayes was taken to the hospital where he was pronounced dead. His cause of death was a second stroke. Hayes had passed 10 days before his 66th birthday. Coincidentally, he'd also passed 1 day after Bernie Mac, one of his fellow actors from the movie Soul Men, had also passed away. After Hayes' death, Scientology leaders insisted that Ike's widow allow them to hold a private ceremony for him the day before his public funeral. In attendance were, among others, Tom Cruise, John Travolta's wife Kelly Preston, actress Ann Archer, and musician Chick Corea. During the ceremony, speeches were written that praised Scientology and praised Isaac Hayes, in that order. During his career, Isaac Hayes became a star almost by accident. He could have easily continued to excel as a songwriter and just been great at that. Instead, a combination of circumstances and his ambition paved the way for him to become a soul music icon as well as a sex symbol. His scoring of the movie Shaft, as well as his worldwide hit theme from Shaft, in themselves would have been enough to cement his legacy. Hayes has become an inspiration for all artists who have followed him. His music has been sampled by the likes of Ashanti, Big Daddy Kane, Mary J. Blige, Dr. Dre, Eric B. and Rakim, Ice Cube, Jay-Z, Ludacris, The Notorious B.I.G., Snoop Dogg, and TLC. Hayes had 11 children, 14 grandchildren, and 3 great-grandchildren. 2 of his children, Isaac III and Heather, are both involved in music. Isaac is a hip hop producer known as Ike Dirty, while Heather fronts the Heather Hayes Experience, playing at weddings and company events. We'd never seen anybody like Isaac Hayes before him, and it's a safe bet we won't see anybody like him in the future. Like most of the great ones, Hayes was one of one. What do you all think of Isaac Hayes' career? Did you know he had written these great songs before he ever got to be a star in his own right? What are your favorite songs or favorite albums that he was released or was involved with? Let us know in the comments. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to and checking out our video. We appreciate you spending time with us. We have other videos that need love too, so go check those out as well. Thanks again and see you soon.